The second type of modifiers is called a gerund modifier. A gerund is a verb that ends in an ing. Okay, so let's have an example. Having finished all my assignments, I called my friends to arrange for that night's gathering. Where is the modifier? The modifier is having finished all my assignments. How do we start this modifier? Yes, we start it with having. It's an ing form of the verb. Okay, so this is the second type of modifiers after the first type, which is the prepositional modifier. The second type is called the gerund modifier. Let's have another look at the other example. Approaching the accident site, we all got ready to help. Okay, so approaching, if you remember, means to come closer. So we were coming closer to the accident site. Okay, so where is the modifier here? It's approaching. What type of modifier it is? It's a gerund modifier. That's correct, because it starts with a gerund, with an ing form of the verb. So the first type is called a prepositional modifier, the second one is called the gerund modifier, and the third one is called a past participle modifiers. Okay, so what's a past participle? It's the third form of the verb. Like, for example, in the first example, known. Known is the third form of the verb, or the past participle form of the verb know. So know, knew, known. Let's read this example together. Known for his stubbornness, Jack was unwilling to cooperate again. I think you still remember this example about Jack. So where is the modifier here? The modifier is known for his stubbornness. How did we start it? We started it with known. It's a past participle form of the verb. Okay, so a third option to start a modifier is to start it with a past participle form of the verb. Let's have another example here of the past participle modifiers. Built to last. The pyramids have always been a mystery. Okay, where's the modifier? Built to last. How did we start it? We started with built, which is the third part of the verb, or the past participle form of the verb. Okay, so my dear students, for now we need to find out the right way to use the modifiers. We have two rules here on this page, and I need you to pay great attention to these two rules beside the first rule that we talked about, which was the punctuation pattern. That's right. Okay, so if you still remember the punctuation pattern, we must use a comma after the modifier. We have two other rules here that will be of great help to you to identify the correct or the incorrect use of modifiers. Okay, so rule number one, no subject in the modifier. I mean, no doer in the modifier. What does this rule mean? It means that if you read the modifier by itself, I mean, if you read the modifier alone, you as a reader cannot identify the doer of the verb mentioned in the modifier. And if you cannot identify the subject or the doer of the verb of the modifier is most likely correct. If the subject is mentioned in the first part, so the first part is not a modifier at all. Okay, so let's go through this example. Enjoying the fresh air and the sun. Then we put the comma. Let me ask you, who enjoys the fresh air and the sun? Can you tell me? Actually, no. And it should be this way when you are using a modifier. You shouldn't know who the person that does the verb of the modifier is. Okay? So, rule number one, if you remember, it's the punctuation, the comma after the modifier. Rule number two, when you read the modifier, there is no doer that you can identify by only reading the modifier. Okay? So, where should we find the doer of that verb? Okay, that is rule number 2. It says the doer of what? Of the modifier's verb. The doer must follow the comma immediately. So the doer must come immediately after the comma. Okay, so in the main clause that comes after the modifier, it must start with the doer of the verb mentioned in the modifier. This is a golden rule, guys. Okay, so let's read this example. Enjoying the fresh air and the sun. This is the modifier that we have worked on illustrating rule number 1. Enjoying the fresh air and the sun. Who enjoys the fresh air and the sun? That's told to us immediately after the comma. The tourists. The tourists seemed relaxed. Okay, so for this rule, we must mention the doer of the modifier verb immediately after the comma, not in any other place. Okay, so 3 rules here: the comma after the modifier, no doer in the modifier, and the doer is mentioned immediately after the comma in the main clause. Okay, so now I do have some questions for you from the SAT tests. Okay, let's start with the with this question. We're going to read starting from approaching. Okay, so approaching a doorway in which dangles a red envelope filled with green paper money. The lion's teeth snare the envelope. Okay, so approaching a doorway, does that remind you of anything? Yes, we do have here a sentence that starts with an ing verb. It could be a modifier, right? So let's test this. We have 3 tests here to tell that this part is a modifier. The first one, how it starts. It starts with an ing verb. If you still remember, ing, past participle, or a preposition. So that sentence passes the first test. Okay, what about the second test? The second test is that you cannot tell who does the verb reading the modifier only. So, approaching a doorway in which dangles a red envelope filled with green paper money. Let me ask you, who approaches? We don't know. Okay, so this passes the second test as well. Okay, do we have a comma? Yes. Okay, so what is the fourth test? The thing that comes immediately after the comma is the doer of the verb approaching. So what comes here after the comma? The lion's teeth. Do you think that the lion's teeth are the things that approached a doorway? No way. The lion itself can approach a doorway, but not the lion's teeth. So here, we didn't mention the subject, the doer, after the comma. We actually mentioned a part of the doer after the comma. Okay, so here lies the mistake. I need to mention the doer immediately after the comma here, and the doer is the lion, not its teeth. Okay, so in the options here, I should look for a main clause that starts with the line itself. Have a look at option B. Yes, you're right. Lion snares the envelope with its teeth. Let's read the whole thing one more time. Approaching a doorway in which dangles a red envelope filled with green paper money. The lion snares the envelope with its teeth. Now, we have overcome this problem, which is called a dangling modifier. A dangling modifier is when we use a modifier and we do not use the doer immediately after the comma. Okay? So another question here is, okay, let's read it together, starting from living. Okay, living independently and demonstrating an intense work ethic. The Harvey girls became known as transformative force in the American West. Okay, do we have a modifier? Yes, we start with a gerund. Okay, and we don't know who lives. okay? And the doer, which is the Harvey girls, immediately comes after the comma. But the problem is that we don't have a comma. We have a semicolon. So the problem here in this modifier is the punctuation. Okay? So after the word ethic, we must use a comma, nothing else. Okay? But here the writer used a semicolon. He has made a mistake. So in the options, what do you think is the best answer to this question? Okay? So guys, I will leave this question for you to answer it, and you tell me your choices. And one more time, I need you to stay home these days. I need you to keep safe and healthy, and expect some more lessons to be broadcast on our YouTube channel. And thank you very much for watching. That was Mr. Rami Abbas, your English teacher, and see you soon, safe and healthy. Thank you very much for your time.